Now, while the Comey hearing took up a lot of national spotlight, Republicans were actually making good on a long-standing policy priority: deregulating Wall Street. Now, House Republicans recently just passed a 580-page bill that would do more to deregulate the banking industry than a single piece of legislation in a generation. Now, Vox is reporting on this, and it's called the Financial Choice Act. Oh, gotta love the Orwellian language in this one. Whose choice? Who's it given a choice? Oh, right, the bankers. Now, it was approved in the House by a 233 to 186 margin. Now, unsurprisingly, every House Democrat voted against this piece of legislation, and they were joined by a singular Republican defector, Representative Walter Jones from North Carolina. Now, it goes to the Senate next, and as of right now, DOA. But wait, why is it so important then? Well, Vox explains that some of its key measures, including defunding several key banking regulatory agencies, could be advanced through budget reconciliation and would only require a simple majority of votes. Now, Senator Jim Inhofe, the snowball guy, says, quote, "I think this has a very good chance of passing. There are a lot of Democrats who are going to be supporting this. Even Democrats have bankers in their district." Sadly, unlike on climate change, Jim Inhofe actually has a good point, and he's actually correct. There are a lot of Democrats who get paid off by the bankers. I mean, for example, Cory Booker, very, very close to Wall Street. So, yeah, we could see some report for some of these provisions. That's as long as Cory Booker is in the spotlight. If nobody's paying attention to him, this guy's going to vote 100% on getting rid of some of these Wall Street regulations. At least that's my take of the situation. So let me give you some of the details of what this bill would do. Basically, the Choice Act would eliminate most of Dodd-Frank. Now remember, Dodd-Frank was passed in a response to the financial crisis as a way to prevent another financial crisis. Now, I've personally said I think it's too weak, and that stands. However, it's still better than nothing. Now, it did take some of the steps to slow down the inevitability of another crash, which I believed was going to happen anyway. Now, the crash is looking far more likely. Now, without those steps that were taken in Dodd-Frank, according to experts, a crash like 2008 is far more likely. Which, again, it was likely before. Now it seems even more likely and would possibly happen sooner if this gets passed. Now, among the provisions in this is the proposed elimination of the Volcker Rule. Now, the Volcker Rule essentially prohibits commercial banks from making speculative and risky trades, or at least certain types. So, no more Volcker Rule. Now we can do more speculation. Now we can do even more risky bets. Wonderful. As if Wall Street isn't already casino. Now, the Choice Act would also gut the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Now, again, Republicans want to do that because, what, protecting consumers? No, I don't want to protect consumers. No, the hell with consumers. I love giant corporations. Consumers don't give me my money. They don't send checks to me. Corporations send my checks. So, of course, I'm not going to protect people. I'll protect corporations. Besides, corporations are the best kind of people, I heard. Now, Vox notes that the CFPB has won millions of dollars from big corporations by suing those who use deceptive practices for their customers. Now, unfortunately for regular people, you get rid of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, well, you won't have as much protection from these predatory practices. I mean, there's a lot of people that the CFPB took on behalf of regular people who were screwed over by these giant companies. Now, the bill, sponsored by Jeb Hensarling, wouldn't get rid of that entirely. But what it would do is that it would effectively render the agency powerless by letting Congress control its funding. Now, it would also allow the White House to fire the agency's director at will, and would strip it of a broad range of rulemaking authority. So already, no money, I get to pick who runs it, so just pick a Republican who doesn't care about regulation or consumers at all, and they won't do anything. And even if they could do something, we wouldn't have the money to do anything. And it also wouldn't have the power to do anything. It wouldn't be able to make rules. So essentially, you're completely neutering the CFPB. Wonderful. Because again, who gives a shit about consumers, right? Now, there are also provisions that would eliminate financial regulatory agencies that would try to ensure that big Wall Street banks were not able to put themselves in positions like the ones that they did in 2007. For example, doing all those risky derivatives when it came to the housing market and creating this enormous bubble that burst. Now, we're already in a bubble with the housing, and we're also in a student loan bubble. Oh, you take away those provisions, here we go. That bubble inflates even faster, and then one of these days, pop. There it goes. Now, Republicans, some of the specifics of this, would want to allow banks that meet certain capital requirements to be exempt from a huge number of the regulations that govern their behavior. It would make it far more difficult for federal regulators to issue new regulations by imposing strict new standards for doing so, and Congress would make it much easier for banks to pass stress tests that gauge whether a bank could survive an economic shock. Now, those stress tests, that's very important actually, to make sure that, hey man, you got enough capital requirements or reserves to make sure that if you have a big crash, that you don't go under, so that we don't have to go and save you. That would be nice if you, you know, to have that cushion so that they don't go belly up. Get rid of that. Well, and suddenly we're back to where we were in 2007. Now, another thing is that it would also split the Federal Reserve in half and prevent it from coordinating financial regulations and monetary policy, something that they said, that experts say, will make bubbles more likely and more dangerous to the economy. I'm more of like, why not just nationalize the Fed? But that's a whole completely different new conversation. So I'm not going to get into that. Now, it would also reduce the deference given to regulatory agencies, making regulations, again, harder to pass and harder to interpret it. So, now, not only that, now we talked about bailing out the banks, right? Hensarling's bill would also get rid of something called the Orderly Liquidation Authority. Now, that's actually a key provision passed in Dodd-Frank that controls what happens when financial firms get too big to fail and fail anyway. Now, we haven't had to use this, and it didn't exist back in 2008. Again, this was created in 2010 to prevent taxpayer-funded bailouts. Now, under the OLA, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation can step in to immediately take control of a failing bank. Now, they give an example. They give an example of JP Morgan. Now, if JP Morgan was on the verge of bankruptcy, the federal government can step in and say, okay, we're going to take control of the bank and make sure that when we take control, that your collapse doesn't mess up everybody else. That it doesn't create this chain reaction which crashes all the other banks around you that have investments in JP Morgan. Okay. Now, you might be asking, so wait a minute, how's that different than the bailouts? I mean, how do you know that taxpayer money isn't going to go help to go help JP Morgan, especially since the government owns it? Well, and they also think that, and this is what the Republicans are trying to sell this plan with, saying, well, Jeb Hensarling's plan, he says that we're going to get rid of too big to fail, that we're going to get rid of the taxpayer bailouts. Well, the LLA has already gotten rid of taxpayer bailouts. And so he's basically lying about this provision. See, having a bank go through the OLA would ensure that the emergency funding actually doesn't come from taxpayers. The law requires other financial firms with a stake in the bank to end up shouldering those costs. So, for example, JP Morgan goes out of, is starting to go out of business. The OLA takes it over. The government takes it over. And Goldman Sachs happens to have a stake in JP Morgan. Well, it's not the taxpayer that's going to pay to bail out that bank. It's JP Morgan. Oh, interesting. Now, the OLA also requires the government, or I'm sorry, allows the government to immediately fire all the bank managers and forces its employees to pay back the bonuses. So again, the government can take it over, make sure that any crash doesn't spread to the rest of the economy. It doesn't use any taxpayer money, but instead gets money from the other big banks to pay to make that bank solvent again, and it claws back any executive bonuses. This bill would get rid of that provision and bring it back to what existed back in 2007. Now, look, that sounds cool. I would go further. I would break up the banks and just solve the problem that way. You break up the banks, give the government the power to take them over if they need be, and then make the executives and banks pay for it. I would also set up rules to prevent them from going into this in the first place. Ban speculation. I mean, what I want is for banks to be banks again. Meaning, you lend money to individuals and businesses, and that's it. No playing these stupid stock market games. No trying to make money off money, and sadly that seems to be what they're doing instead of loaning out to small businesses. Sure, they do some of that, and it's good that they do that, and they should stick to that because that's their primary focus. Not, again, playing this Wall Street casino. Okay? The best option here would be to make it so that you don't have a situation where you have another financial crash. You ban speculation, okay? Now, Dodd-Frank, one of its faults, I pointed out, they didn't put a stop to any of that. Wall Street is a casino, but at least it made sure that if they crashed the economy, we didn't have to bail them back out. I know, small comfort, right? Now, on this, some Republicans and some Democrats are saying, absolutely not. These banks are our donors, and we're going to deregulate them so that they can make more money. And in turn, they're going to give us more in-campaign bribes. They don't want to be regulated, even if it means their own safety. All they're worried about is short-term profits. And all the CEOs are worried about is how much compensation am I going to get in this quarter? And, hey man, if this crashes, I don't care. I have a golden parachute. We saw that back in 2007. Okay, they had their golden parachute. If we allow the Republicans and the corporate Democrats to get rid of the OLA or Dodd-Frank, well, then we'll be right back to those same conditions that led to the crash and to the subsequent bailouts. To show you how so many people are actually against this, other than the Republicans, you have Ben Bernanke, who's, trust me, not a friend of the show, certainly not somebody that I look up to or respect at all, even saying, hey man, this is too far. Let's not go this way. You know why? It's not going to work out well. Quote, eliminating the OLA will be a major mistake, imprudently putting the economy and financial system at risk. And you know why? It's because, look, we know what it's like when you let the bankers run wild. And if we let them run wild again, if we take all the rules away, if we take the cops off the street, and we just give it over to the robbers, what do you think they're going to do? They're going to do what robbers do. So how likely is this to pass? Well, the whole package would need 60 votes. However, as I mentioned earlier, the danger is that some of these parts can go through reconciliation. Now, reconciliation requires 51 votes, a simple majority. You don't need to have a filibuster-proof majority. Right now, since elections do have consequences, you have 52 Republican senators. So meaning it would take only 2 defections to kill a reconciliation package. Even if all the Democrats vote against it, which is possible that they won't, because of how much money the banks give in legal bribes to members of the Senate. So, look, I'm not very hopeful when it comes to this situation. Right now, there seems to be an even bigger chance that the economy, if these provisions pass, will lead to another collapse on Wall Street and perhaps even more bailouts for the banks and more economic hardship on Main Street. We can't get rid of this, but it looks like the Republicans, in their infinite wisdom, are looking to do so anyway. Buckle up. This is what we mean by consequences. Hey everybody, thanks for watching this video. If you want to see more like this, please hit the subscribe button below. And if you want to support truly independent progressive media, please consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/TYTNation.